More than a year ago, I showed off a system I was working on that would allow me to easily add different types of melee and ranged weapons to my game. I had set out to create a system where adding and customizing weapons would not have the overhead of creating many animator controllers and even more animation files. I set out to create a system where a weapon could be anything and do anything, and would not be constrained by the limits of inheritance, limits like a weapon used to block being fundamentally different from a weapon used to attack. But instead, the limits of my own knowledge and experience led me to create a system that was pretty at first, but hid a dark truth. So I took a step back and I said, this time I'm going to do it right. And so with that, I would like to welcome you to my first ever devlog. So far, I have implemented 3 weapon types: a sword, a bow, and a tome. In each of these types, I have 2 weapons so far. The first sword is Barden's Sword, a simple and elegant melee weapon. The second sword is a simple scimitar, functionally the same as Barden's Sword, but it just looks different. For the bows, I have a simple wooden bow that shoots a generic arrow. The bow features a draw length, so releasing the arrow too early means it'll not travel as far or deal as much damage. The second bow is a crystal bow, a more powerful bow that has the ability to charge up and fire multiple arrows. Finally, for the tomes, I have the Magic Missile Tome and the Fireball Tome. The Magic Missile Tome can be charged 3 times. This will cause 3 magic missiles to be spawned, and they will track any target within an area of the player. They do get a little confused sometimes though. The Fireball Tome simply throws a fireball towards an enemy. Okay, so let's talk about the goals of the system. The main goal is to have many weapons in the game that the player can use. Beyond that, I want different weapons within a weapon type to look unique. For example, equipping different swords will change the graphic of the actual weapon in the player's hands. I want any weapon to be able to do anything any other weapon can. By this I mean that a sword could be set up to block on a certain attack, or spawn a projectile. If I want, I can make a bow shoot an arrow at the front and a magic missile at the back. If I want, I can make a sword swing rain down arrows from above. If I want to make a bow that does not fire arrows but instead slaps the enemy into oblivion with its bowstring, I can. Finally, I want weapon code to be as reusable as possible. I want to be able to construct a weapon's functionality from a library of components that all give rise to these different abilities. This is to make it so that the time investment needed to create a new weapon is minimal. The weapon consists of 3 main parts: the parent weapon game object, the base game object, and the weapon sprite game object. Weapon logic is built up using a component-based system to get away from the shortcomings of inheritance for this application. The parent weapon game object is where the weapon script sits. This script is responsible for how the player state machine interacts with the weapon logic, and is also responsible for adding all relevant components to the weapon based on a scriptable object data file. The base game object has a sprite renderer that will be responsible for showing the base sprites of any attack, an animator used to play the base animations of any weapon, and a script that holds all possible animation events that a weapon might need. Some of these events include triggering an attack action, indicating when an attack animation has finished, or informing what the current phase of an attack is. Any weapon components that build up the logic can listen to these animation events through this script. The base game object also has another child game object that the base weapon animations can animate to provide some more customizability to the weapons. For example, the bow uses this to indicate where the arrow sprite should be placed for each frame of the animation. This allows me to swap out the arrow sprites for any of my bows. The weapon sprite game object only has a sprite renderer component. One of the weapon components references this sprite renderer and puts the correct weapon sprite for the current frame of the current attack animation. It does this by listening to the base game object sprite renderer for sprite change events, and then updates the weapon sprite accordingly to what it knows about the current attack count and phase. And that is basically how it works for now. I hope you guys enjoyed that little peek into what I've been working on. Sorry that it's taking so long to continue the tutorial series, but I really want to get it right this time and actually be proud of it. If you see anything that you think I might be able to do in a better way, let me know and we can have a discussion. And as a thank you to all of my patrons, old and new, you'll have access to the current state of the project over on GitHub. I'm going to keep working hard on this system, and I will make another one of these devlogs when I get shields and such in the game. But before I go, I would just like to say thank you to all of my supporters and wonderful people over on Patreon, and a huge special thank you to Cody, SM, Madger, Jake, Patrick, and Itami. You guys are absolute mad lads, and I really appreciate it. And I hope you guys all have a wonderful day.